So there are, I think, two core points that I want to make about the feeling tone. So one, I want to give you a little bit more background, how that is embedded in the Buddhist philosophy, and then also give you some input on how this works in our nervous system, basically. So the idea is, so why is there a whole foundation, and the second foundation that is dedicated to these feeling tones? Is dedicated to these feeling tones. So I said in the beginning, this is the second foundation of mindfulness. They're just four. And there's a whole foundation dedicated to these feeling tones. And we can be pretty sure that the Buddha thought that is mighty important. So after we bring awareness to the body, to all the sensations that are going on in the body, then the second foundation is, and now let's see, how do we experience those sensations? Yeah. And we can experience them as pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And then what we start to notice is our patterns, how we are reacting to, as I said in the beginning, right? So we will try to hold on to something that is pleasant, and we try to push away something that is unpleasant. But what is very interesting when we're going into the Buddhist teaching, so the first step is, so I should just back off one step. So really core principle in the Buddhist teachings or Western psychology at this point is that it is less about our experience, but how we're relating to it. Yeah. So, but we usually think it's about our experience. We usually think if this wasn't happening, if this wouldn't be here, I'd be fine. Some version of that. Yeah, everyone's with me. Yeah. And again, this doesn't mean we're just like doormats and let everything just happen. And no, not at all. Yeah. So it is, if we can change something, of course, we'll do that. We try to do it. If we find that this is what we call wise action or kind action, and not just busyness, because we don't know how to be still. Yeah. That's a whole other thing. But we all have had that experience where something's going on in our life, and depending on how we feel about it in this moment, we suffer, or we kind of okay, or we forget it for periods of time, right? Is that everybody's brain? Some version of that? Yeah. And it's quite amazing. We can be totally fine because we've just been distracted, focusing on something else. Yeah. And the thing that's so difficult or so unpleasant is it's like it's gone. Yeah. And then we have this moment, boom, and there it is again, and we feel it again. Yeah. But this fact is that it is let's look at how we're relating to it is actually very empowering, because there are a lot of things that are out of our control. There are a lot of things that we can't change. Yeah. So Maya Angelou has this beautiful saying that she says, well, if you can't change it, change your attitude. Yeah. So what we want to do here is we want to look at our attitude. And for that, the teachings of the feeling tones are really, really helpful, because what they actually say is that the pleasant, unpleasant, neutral is not inherent in the experience. I'll say that again because that part's really important. The unpleasant, pleasant, or neutral is not inherent in the experience, but this is usually how we perceive it. Yeah, we say oh, if that person wouldn't raise their voice, yeah, I wouldn't experience that as unpleasant. Or if that person was nice, I mean, yeah, so we have these stories. But then, right, you can think of a situation where whatever that person is doing or saying, it just doesn't touch you. You're just yeah, okay, whatever. Yeah. And that feels way more powerful than being almost like a puppet on a string with some. Have you noticed that? Isn't that like terrible? Like that person says something or does something and you're like, right, you're just doing this. So they do like this and not powerful. Yeah. When we're teaching veterans, like we use that as a little like sneaky way into selling mindfulness, right? Because I think like mindfulness might be just too woo-woo or out there. And we're saying like, so are you in power? Like if somebody comes up and just provokes you and you just explode and make a mess around you, that's not powerful, isn't it? You go like, and then we get their attention. So like, oh, tell me about power. um, so we can look at that. Yeah, so we can first look at the fact that an experience in itself. So the teachings, what they say is, so at the sense doors, experience is arising. We see something, we hear something, we sense something. And in that moment, the feeling tone is co-arising. And the feeling tone is usually dependent on our previous experience. Yeah. So we've had that experience before, therefore we think it's like this again. Yeah. And it's, you can see like it's culturally shaped. It is the time that we're in. It's like your experience that you've made before. Like all of this plays into, yeah. So we have an experience and our brain. So think about our brain's main job is to keep us safe. Yeah. And then to procreate at some point. But in order to do that, we actually need to be safe first. Yeah. So otherwise, so that's not working either. So, and our brain is a prediction machine. Yeah. So our brain has evolved to predict what an experience is going to be like. Yeah. So we're not experiencing actually the world as it is, but the world as we are, or as we have experienced the world before, I should say. Yeah, which is like really, really important to start to see that. So sense doors, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. So everybody understands, right, that the pleasant, unpleasant, neutral is not inherent in the experience. No? Think about a vegetable that you hate, and I can give you like 10 people at least who love that vegetable. So it's not in the vegetable. Yeah. But we often think like, oh my God, like smell of whatever, like Brussels sprouts, just I love Brussels sprouts, but I've heard people go like, right? No, it's not in the Brussels sprouts. Anyway, um, so arising. And then what happens? And this is really what is really important. So when we start to see this, then already we can have more freedom, because usually all of this happens very quickly. Yeah. So we have an experience, we have the flavor, and then we're already into wanting or not wanting. And the wanting or not wanting is what gets us into trouble. Yeah. And so in the Buddhist teaching, this idea, so, and this is actually part, there's like, maybe at some point we can break it down more, like the dependent origination. So there are 12 different links. Yeah. And part of this is like, so we have the sense doors and we have the feeling tones. And then at this point, what we have is the arriving of craving. And out of craving comes clinging. And out of clinging comes rebirth. And rebirth means we're in the same place again. Yeah. So don't think about like next life or something, but like, oh, here we are again. Ever had that feeling? Like, here we go again. Yeah. Been here before many times. Feels familiar to my system. Yeah. And what is the teachings, what they say is in this moment, we can step out. And how are we stepping out? We're stepping out through awareness and just becoming aware of this. Saying like, oh, here's unpleasant. Yeah. And there is maybe the inkling to do something or to not do something. And can I just be aware? Can I just watch that? Yeah. And we start with just watching it for a little bit. And a really great example, I didn't use that in the meditation today, but which can be very, very helpful is to work with itches. We love itches in meditation practice. Yeah. So anybody has had like crazy itches while you're meditating? Yes. And have you ever had the instructions as to not scratch the itch? And you go like, that's so stupid. Like, why would I want to do this? Because it could go away when I scratch it. Yeah. But why we love this so much is because it's something that's really annoying. It is something that gives us an impulse. So it's usually something that we label as unpleasant. And you're not going to die if you don't scratch it, even though your brain might tell you that. Yeah. So, and have you anybody ever tried to not next time, yes. Yeah, and I immediately do this here. So um, because often we're not even aware. Yeah, we're not even aware that we have that impulse and we already have, yeah, moved, scratched, adapted, shifted, all of this flies completely under the radar. So what we do in meditation, as we sit still, we notice that. We say like, oh, my nose is really itchy. I really don't like that. And I have this strong impulse to scratch. And then I said, like, okay, so what's going to happen if I don't do that? Anybody ever tried that? What happens? It goes away. Yeah. Sometimes it gets stronger. Yeah. Yeah. But it will go away at some point. And to realize that, if you've never done that before, can be very insightful. Because what do we learn when we do that? We don't have to react. Yeah. Because up to now, our story was, well, the itch goes away because I scratch it. Yeah. We're allowing it. Yeah, we're allowing it. And it's not easy because it can be quite uncomfortable. But you see how this is a really great exercise, and it's something you can do that with all kinds of things. Where you can just to play with that, just like, oh, here's an impulse. What happens if I don't act on it? Yeah. So like you feel like you need to go, I don't know, go to the fridge or get a bag of chips or something. Yeah. So these things, it's just like, are you aware of that? Are you aware of the impulse? And it's not that you're not allowed to do that, but just to say, can you play with that? And often, when we start doing this, often we'll just get distracted and we'll just forget about it. Yeah. And when we do this, do you see how that could introduce a sense of freedom? Because who's in control otherwise? The itch, yes. The itch is in control, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And it's quite powerful to say, okay, all right. And of course, and if at some point you go like, oh, it's driving me crazy, you can just scratch. Do you want to have a question? Oh, Mike, so otherwise the people online can't hear.
So that I'm wondering if you have a suggestion. How does that work with thinking?
Mhm.
So rather than itch, not scratching it,
Yes.
a thought, not following it. I mean,
Mhm.
yeah, I'm curious.
Yes, that's exactly what we do. Yeah, because you can, right? I think we all know thoughts that have pressure behind them. They feel like we need to think them. Yeah. And we can't, right? There's some thoughts that they're very easy to let go of. Yeah. So and then it's actually a great place of meditation to observe your thinking and to notice all different kinds of thoughts. Yeah. And you notice some thoughts are just like, yeah, whatever. Like, what am I going to have for lunch tomorrow? Right, it's gone. Here, it's gone. No problem. And then there are other thoughts that are just like this, right? And they're really hard to let go of. But what about all these thoughts in between? Yeah, so we don't necessarily start with the thoughts that have like the most power, but we practice just like during the day to see like, oh, thinking is happening and I don't have to follow that. Yeah. And this doesn't come from aversion. It's just something sweetheart, this is not helpful right now. Yeah, we're doing something else now. And what's very important, because what comes in at this point is really the practice to shifting to something neutral or something pleasant if you can. Yeah. But you need to, especially when we work with thoughts, we need to come into sensing, into feeling, sensing. Yeah. So, yeah, we feel your hands, orient yourself in the room. Take a couple of deep breaths.
Would that go for emotion as well?
Yeah, so with emotion, so the way that we're working with that is so we also don't follow the story. Yeah, so because then we're looping. So there's an emotion which comes with a story. We go into the story. We repeat all the details. We have more of the emotion, which brings up more of the story. And again, how we get out of it. And again, it's not an avoiding or shutting down. Yeah. And then, of course, working with emotion, like that's more nuanced because sometimes actually we just want to be with them and make space for them. But at other times, especially when we notice that we're looping, yeah, we do the same thing is we find something in our felt experience through the senses and focus on that instead. Yeah. And you can really see why we want to have like a meditation practice that trains us to work with thoughts. Yeah. And that is harder in everyday life as we move through the day than when we're sitting. Yeah. So that's why we're often saying like sitting is almost like your gym, yeah, where you work out. So that's like you do the repetitions with your weights. You don't do that because it's so amazing to do repetitions with the weights, but you do that so that in everyday life, you're stronger and you can move your body in the way that you want. Yeah. And in a similar way, like, so that's one way how we can really see meditation. Yeah. Like working with, because we have the whole variety of thinking there. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, that's an important question. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. So this moment of sense doors, feeling tones, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. And then the next step is we're moving first into craving and then into clinging. So I have to say, for me as a non-native English speaker, those are the same words. It's the same for me, like craving and clinging. You go like, what? Right? I'm just honest. So, but I've learned that there is a distinction and that clinging is lighter than craving. Is that right? Or do I mess it up now? The opposite. See, I can't be trusted on that without my notes. So which one is harder? And craving? The clinging. So we have craving and then we have clinging. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So craving, but so the way that it makes sense to me is that the craving is more like a preference. It's like, oh, it would be nice to have a cup of tea. Yeah. Or I would rather not be in this position much longer. Yeah. And then the clinging is like, I need to get away from this. Yeah. So there's more compulsion in it. And we can see that is a lot harder to then step out of that loop. Yeah. So, but what we can practice really, or this is what the teachings are saying, the sooner we can notice this co-arising and just say like pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, when we be aware at that moment, we don't even have to move into clinging. Yeah. And that is like, there's actually some interesting neuroscience research on that. So that in that moment, kind of the formation of a habit as it is arising is still more loose. But then as we spend more time with it, it becomes more connected in a way that we have less options there and we have less freedom. And that is what it feels like often, doesn't it? Yeah. So basically, if we can catch it early and we can say, like, oh, coming back to the senses, inviting something that is neutral. Yeah. So then it's easier to kind of move out, because once we're really deep into the I have to, or I can't, or this is impossible, of course, that's a lot harder to then step off that. Yeah. Yeah. So, and to kind of wrap it up for tonight, so funny, I just will share just a brief piece. So, getting that motorcycle. How many of you had a negative experience? Unpleasant? Anybody? Some people do. Pleasant? Okay, pleasant. Some people neutral? Okay. So I used to have a very negative associate or like negative feeling tone arising with like loud motorcycles. Since my son, who's now 19, started driving one of those things. And now I start to feel affection when I hear that. And I go like, what? Right. But so again, like it's just an example of like, it's not in the experience, but in, right, in the associations, in our experience, and yeah, all of that. So I wanted to share about the feeling tones with you, because I thought that is, for me, very helpful as we're moving into these next weeks. Holidays for many people, not for everyone, yeah, but like we will all have many, many opportunities to work with unpleasant, pleasant, and neutral. Yeah, is that about right? And so I hope that was helpful for you today to explore that and really put it into practice. Yeah. So when you're just finding yourself going like, "Ah," so remember, like, oh, this is unpleasant. Yeah. So what are my options here? What else is here? This is really like one of the core messages I want you to take home is if you find yourself in something unpleasant and you feel like you're getting like tight and feel stuck, is ask yourself, what else is here? What else is here? Open your senses. Is there something that is pleasant at the same time? Yes, can totally be there at the same time. And if you can't find something pleasant, look for something neutral. There's always something neutral. And what we're doing with this is, again, like we're open a container. Yeah. So when something is unpleasant, our nervous system is made to hyper focus on that. So it excludes everything else. So it makes it way bigger in our experience than it needs to be. So our job is to say, yes, this is unpleasant, and what else is here? And with that, we're open the door again. And then what happens, whatever is unpleasant becomes smaller in relation to it. Yeah. Because now it's not like the only game in town. Yeah. But there is so much more. Yeah. So thank you. Mhm. And if you celebrate, happy holidays. And Melissa will be here on the night of the 1st, I think. Could that be? Is that, yeah, Wednesday? Yeah, right? That's the 1st. I think she's signed up for that. So if you want to come, and I'll see you in January at some point. Thank you.